Hey, what's up guys, and welcome back to Paranormal 101. On this episode, we're going to be taking a look at possibly one of the most chilling and bizarre haunted house stories ever documented, the haunting of Willington Mill. The story goes that in the year 1834, adjacent from Willington Mill itself, which was one of the first steam-driven flour mills in the Northeast, stood a residence occupied by a Quaker named Joseph Proctor along with his family. Though the Proctors weren't the first residents to have experiences on the property, they certainly seemed to have had the most terrifying. The accounts I'm about to describe are a result of Joseph Proctor's own documentation over the course of his family's incredible 11-year stay at Willington Mill. The very beginning of the activity seems to start with a nursemaid employed by the Proctor family at the time. Whenever she would be left home alone with the Proctor children, she would claim to hear loud noises and what sounded like footsteps coming from an empty room on the floor above, a room directly above the nursery. Supposedly, she would hear these noises every night she was there until eventually she requested to be relieved of her duties at the home. Considering himself a practical man, Mr. Proctor didn't believe the nurse's claims, and shortly after, a new nurse was hired. Almost immediately after she began staying at the home, she also heard noises coming from the vacant room upstairs. Once again, though, Mr. Proctor shrugged off her claims and believed there had to be a simple and logical explanation for the disturbances. It was around this time that Mrs. Proctor also began hearing the same loud, thumping footsteps. The room in question had supposedly been nailed shut for quite some time, and the only window in the room boarded shut. The floor was covered in a thin layer of soot, which hadn't been disturbed in any way, so no trace of footprints from anyone or anything were visible. Eventually, the Proctors began hearing loud banging coming from within their very own bedroom. Strangely, from that point on, they would never hear any noises or footsteps coming from the vacant room upstairs. It was almost as if the activity itself had relocated and taken up residency with the Proctor family. The foreman of the mill at the time, Thomas Mann, told Proctor in confidence that he too had experienced strange phenomena on the property. He told Proctor that he would often hear the sound of someone walking along the gravelly road outside of his residence at night. He would grab a lantern and walk the darkened path himself, but would find no trace of anyone. Around this time, Mann, as well as another neighbor, separately claimed to have witnessed a glowing figure standing in a window of the Proctor's home. Mann gathered his entire family outside to witness the specter along with him, and the image supposedly remained glowing in the window for over 10 minutes. Over the course of the Proctor's stay in the home, just about every member of the family would suffer various terrifying episodes in the residence. Beds began lifting off of the floor, accompanied by what sounded like fists punching and pounding the walls. The Proctor sons, Joseph and Henry, would awaken from the sound of screaming coming from under their beds. Even while investigating this disturbance, Mr. Proctor would hear strange voices, including what was described as the sound of an infant sucking on a bottle. They would attempt to move their youngest daughter Jane to another room, only for her mattress to levitate yet again. On one night in particular, while sleeping beside her aunt, Jane claimed to have seen a face peek out at her from behind the bed curtains in her room. She described the figure as that of a decrepit old woman. The bedrooms weren't the only haven of activity, as the cook would arrive in the morning and often find the kitchen chairs scattered around the room, cabinets opened, and utensils in a mess on the floor. Soon word began to spread locally about the experiences taking place at Willington Mill, including a doctor named Drury, who reached out to Mr. Proctor requesting permission to spend a night at the residence to examine things for himself. Proctor obliged in the request and Drury and a local chemist showed up in an effort to investigate the allegations themselves. Later that night, at around 1 in the morning, Proctor was awakened by the sound of a blood-curdling scream. Drury had apparently come face to face with the apparition of the old woman, the same figure the youngest child, Jane, had seen peering out at her from behind the curtains in her room. At dawn, the doctor and his companion left the house, the trauma of their experience still fresh in their minds. Perhaps the strangest and most bizarre apparition witnessed at the property was a specter resembling that of a monkey. One such sighting took place one day while all 4 children were playing in one of the bedrooms. The figure appeared from nowhere, startling the children, and proceeded to tug on Joseph Jr.'s shoelaces. The children took off after it, but could never find any trace of where the elusive being had gone. Perhaps the most chilling thing about this encounter is that none of the Proctor children had ever actually seen a monkey before that, and at the time, described it as a funny-looking cat. Only years later would the youngest boy, Edmund Proctor, learn that what he had seen was more resembling a monkey. Another one of the more bizarre and downright chilling sightings was observed by Joseph Jr., who at the age of 10 had claimed to have seen an apparition that was a mirror image of himself. According to Joseph, the figure stared at him, peeking out from the shadows by his bed. The phantom figure began walking back and forth from the bedroom window to the wardrobe as it gradually began to dematerialize until it vanished completely. It was around this time that the Proctors, having endured an astonishing 11 years of torment, had finally had enough. For Mr. and Mrs. Proctor, the fear of psychological damage to the minds of their young children had become much too great a risk for the family. In 1866, the Proctors had purchased a new residence, and after sending the rest of their family ahead to the new home, Mr. and Mrs. Proctor, in the midst of gathering their family's belongings, would endure one final night of terror at Willington Mill. They spent the night wide awake, listening to the sounds of thunderous bangs and what sounded like slamming and dragging of furniture, footsteps stomping up and down the stairs, almost comparable to an angry tantrum of rage. The house, though, was completely empty, and the Proctors had only until dawn before finally freeing themselves of an 11-year-long nightmare. The Proctors were finally free to begin their new life in their new home, and much to their unimaginable relief, a home completely free of nightmarish, supernatural torment. As for Willington Mill itself, following the Proctors' departure, the property was split up into 2 separate apartments. In 1868, one family in particular would be so plagued by paranormal occurrences that they would soon flee, refusing to return. Edmund Proctor, now an adult, would find himself returning to Willington Mill in the year 1890 in order to see what had become of the former building. The occupants at the time claimed to have had absolutely no disturbances at Willington Mill. So I'd love to know your thoughts on this bizarre and fascinating story, as I had never heard of it until I read about it in a book many years ago, and it just seemed far too creepy and memorable to pass up doing a video about it. I tried to be as accurate as possible based on the info that I could find online. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and please feel free to comment down below any particular stories or cases involving the paranormal that you'd like to see me cover on a future episode, and also be sure to please like this video and subscribe for more to come in the very near future. If you'd like to check out older episodes of Paranormal 101, then please click the link in the description, and I hope you enjoy. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.